religious liberty is fragile, that even in heritage, like Stuyvesant came from, there can be a fear of differences that leads to oppression. And the more important thing, I think, is that people who were not Quakers, who were not necessarily religious at all, recognized the danger of religious oppression, of the loss of religious liberty. So it's not just a religion thing, it's a liberty thing, it's a freedom thing. Religion is certainly an important part of it, but the people, just the ordinary citizens being worried about their community, worried about their government, worried about a society that would oppress people like that, really stood out. First of all, after the Second Awakening in the 18th century, there was a great differentiation in religion. Religions that had not existed before suddenly came into existence. And so my sense is, from reading history, is that the framers were thinking religious liberty is okay if they're like us, but maybe not so much otherwise, and not so much got to be the norm rather than the exception. So it really forced a re-examination of what religious liberty is about. It's easy to be tolerant, a word that Adams didn't like. It's easy to be tolerant of people that don't seem a threat, but when different ideas, important ideas, are being discussed, well, then that really puts liberty to the test. Well, I think the black churches have been crucial, both to the African American community, but also to the rest of us in several different ways. First of all, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, and the 14th Amendment comes along 3 years later and pronounces due process and equal protection rights for everyone. But saying so don't make it so. And it didn't, the oppressions of decades, centuries did not evaporate. And here we are 150 years later, and we're still trying to achieve the reality of racial equality. And the black churches provided a different reality. Not an escape, but a reality of trust, of justice, of love, of community, that countered the much of what the African American community was still experiencing at that time. So it really provided an example to the adherents, to the members of those congregations, but also to everybody else about what religious liberty can do. But I think the striking thing about the black churches is that it wasn't just about words. It was about music. And you can hear the words and you can respond to them, but when you hear that music, it's just overpowering. Mahalia Jackson and Tommy Dorsey and Andre Crouch and We Shall Overcome Someday. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. Those are powerful words that the music really brings to your soul. And so when you're listening to that and you're seeing that happen in the society around you, you're thinking, if that's what religious liberty is about, I'm for that. I would like that to be the rule of law in this country. The Jehovah's Witnesses cases in the early 40s in the U.S. Supreme Court were remarkable. If for no other reason that the court reversed itself in 3 years. And it went from 8-1 to 6-3 the other way. And the different justices made some difference, but there were really powerful ideas being argued in those cases. But it's interesting on several levels. How did the cases arise? For the same reason that the Flushing Remonstrance arose. The Jehovah's Witnesses were different, just like the Quakers were different. They're not like us. And so it was easy to disassociate the protections of school children that you might otherwise insist on because of those differences. So all the rest of us are saluting the flag and reciting the pledge, you should too. And when that played out in the interim between those two cases, and there was real persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses as a result, I think that helped the Supreme Court take another look at it. But they were very important in trying to find the line between what it means to be a cohesive society and to protect health and welfare and security, and on the other hand, accommodate such important liberties as speech and religion. So they were really astonishing. It was an astonishing turnaround to see the court take one position and then turn really, for the Supreme Court of the United States, turn on a dime. It took what? It took 60 years to overturn separate and equal. It took 3 to overturn the Jehovah's Witnesses cases. We insist on being a nation of laws and applying the rule of law, and we treat the Constitution that way. But concepts like religious liberty are very broad ideas, and it's hard to really draw the lines carefully when you're dealing with so many different situations. So I think one thing those cases showed was you can be wrong about this, that there's, whether you like the group or not, whether you even like religion or not, these freedoms have to be applied in a more balanced way. Religious liberty is not the conception of an author of a constitution. They weren't just thinking to themselves, you know, I wonder what the First Amendment should say. How about freedom of religion? It drew on centuries of experience. It drew on part of the reasons why we were here in the first place. It drew on very deep human values, and so the religious liberty, freedom of speech, the First Amendment are just expressions of those things. So when you're regarding texts like the First Amendment, you're really looking to values that underlie them. The state constitutions all have protections for freedom of religion, just mirroring the United States Constitution's First Amendment. What's the history of the state protection of religious liberty? It's kind of like the national history. It's varied. Sometimes we acquitted ourselves not so well. Sometimes states like Utah were more accepting of this new religion of Mormons, when Missouri was not. So it's kind of varied over time, but the protections are still there. And today, there's more of an argument all of the time that state protections should be at least as real as national protections, and maybe more. And so increasingly, we look to the protections of state law and state constitutions for fundamental rights like religion. And again, I think we do better jobs and worse. The pandemic has really put religious freedom front and center, because it, in the Jehovah's Witnesses cases, the issues were patriotism versus religion. In the pandemic, the issues have been public health versus religion. And so is it a threat for churches to worship, to sing, to meet together, to be not socially distanced, to be unmasked? Is it a threat to public health? What kind of threat? What restrictions should be in place? And it's interesting to me that during the pandemic, all of those issues have been just as front and center and just as highly discussed as with the Jehovah's Witnesses or any other time in our history. We've really, it's like we never get out of the issue. It just comes up in different ways. It was the differences. This is something new. This is something that we didn't think about when we were thinking of religious liberty, but it pushes it. It pushes the boundaries. It makes us think, you know, this is about a more fundamental liberty of conscience, of faith, of expression of that, than just words, even important words in the Constitution. It means the right to practice my faith without a fear of reprisal, with complete freedom, and the corresponding acceptance that others have that same right. One of the mainstays, I think, of religious freedom is that ideas can persuade. When religious freedom is threatened, it's usually because there's some concern that this practice or this faith or belief is somehow going to threaten me or impact me in some adverse way. And strong beliefs and important beliefs like that should be the opposite. They should take the view, oh no, I believe this way because I think it's more persuasive and I'm willing to engage on it. At the same time that we are discussing freedom of religion and all sorts of other ideas, we're finding it harder and harder to engage on fundamental levels. So freedom of religion is to me my own right to practice my understanding and appreciation of others' corresponding right. To people of faith, it's the religious part of it, it's the faith part of it that is the most important thing. And that's why freedom of religion is so important to people of faith. To people who don't share those beliefs, the freedom to do so ought still to be as important. While they can't appreciate perhaps the sincerity of belief, the changes that happen in your life, while they don't relate to that, the reality of God or whatever it is that distances them from religion, they can appreciate a country that allows, is strong enough to provide people the liberty to think differently. And it seems like the opposite of that is just as much a threat to them who don't believe as it is to those who do. If the government the power of the government is going to be used to censor or restrict this group, it could just as easily be used tomorrow to do the same thing with another group. And I should think that non-religious people can appreciate that. Famously, the Ten Commandments monument on the Texas Capitol grounds, you're right, it's just a few steps away, was a part of an advertising campaign by the Fraternal Order of Eagles and Cecil B. DeMille in connection with his production of the Ten Commandments movie. And this monument out here is not unique. They were distributed at the time all over the country, and they still exist. But the issue with the monument was whether it was a government endorsement of religion, of the Ten Commandments as a statement of the Judeo-Christian fundamental beliefs. And if it was, the Supreme Court of the United States thought at the time that was prohibited by the First Amendment, and if it wasn't, if it was secular in nature, then it might not be. So interestingly, the case involving the Texas Amendment monument came to the Supreme Court the same time as a different monument in Kentucky, and the cases were decided opposite ways. The Supreme Court decided 5-4 that the Texas monument was more of a historical statement than a religious statement, and therefore was not a government endorsement of a religious message. Whereas they found the opposite in the Kentucky case, largely because of the different facts that the Kentucky monument had been motivated more by an expression of the substance rather than just historical expression. Now, maybe that's not what First Amendment analysis should turn on, but that was the thinking at the time, and the cases came out different ways. We asked one of our employees one time, some years ago, 40 years ago, here at the court, what do you think about freedom of speech? And he said, it depends on what's being said. And freedom of religion is kind of that way too. With respect to speech, it's been said famously, I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And that ought to be the view of religion, but sometimes it's not. And it's an enlargement of that. It's an appreciation for the underlying value that grows and helps change the reality of freedom of religion in practice. Perhaps one of the most important aspects of these kinds of basic liberties and freedoms is that it can't just be about words. It has to be about reality. Justice Scalia was famously pointed out that lots of countries have the same words that we have in our Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, but they don't mean anything. Somebody just thought, oh, it might be a good idea to stick that in there. But when it comes down to actually doing it, that's a very different thing. Justice Scalia thought that one of the important protections of fundamental liberties in the Bill of Rights was the separation of powers, making sure that the government couldn't gang up on you, that the power was divided in our country into three branches, the executive, the legislative, and the courts, so that there was more likelihood that there were going to be counterbalances and protections would emerge from those differences. When you look at the rest of the world, sometimes that's been the case, and sometimes, very sadly, and it has not been. Again, as you look around the world today, there are persecutions of different religions here and there in countries around the world, and in some respects, they're not much of a much different nature than the persecutions that we've seen from time to time in our country.